Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim and this video is for the lecture week 2. Dhammapada is one of Buddhist sutra found in Khuddaka Nikaya. Dhammapada defines perception like this. Preceded by perception are mental states. For them is perception supreme. From perception have they sprung. If with perception polluted one speaks or acts, thence suffering follows, as a wheel the drought ox foot. Preceded by perception are mental states. For them is perception supreme. From perception have they sprung. If with a tranquil perception one speaks or acts, thence ease follows, as a shadow that never departs. So you can find two kinds of cognition. One is perception, the other one is mental state. Perception is followed by mental state. So this stanza signifies perception in the Buddhist perspective. Understanding the working of mind is seen as central to progress on the path and the achievement of awakening. Buddhist perspective on perception provide Buddhist models of consciousness and its transformation critically different from those already under consideration in the science. Understanding the mind as mechanism characterized by the creation and manipulation of representation. So the significance of perception in Buddhism encounter with reality and knowledge is given to the senses. Because of our senses, by seeing, by hearing, by smelling, by tasting, by touching, all sorts of suffering can be generated. So how we deal with the senses is very important. Therefore, innumerable appearances in Buddhist canon regarding perceptual process by means of senses. So how humans work with the senses is very important in terms of transforming human mind. There are 6 kinds of sense organ compared to 5 senses in the West. Let's see the entities and processes described by Buddhist thought process. Mahapunama Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya, the oldest monk asked the Buddha about the 5 aggregates of grasping, how craving developed, and would cease with respect to each aggregate. So, I will introduce Mahapunama Sutta a little bit later, but in this sutra, 5 aggregates are explained in detail. 5 aggregates are Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, and Vijnana. What we perceive to be a self as a collection or concatenation of 5 aggregates. When there are these 5 aggregates, there is a person. 5 aggregates can be subdivided into 2 types. One is nama, mental faculty, and rupa, just form. So, nama and rupa means nama means mental faculty, mentality, and rupa sounds like body, but that's not true. Buddhism rejects the distinction between body and mind. The rupa just simply indicate form or physical aspect. Actually, rupa unified state of mind and body. Consciousness only exists in the field created by the perceiver and the perceived. The dualistic interpretation is a mistaken belief by especially Yogacara. So you must know what component make up five aggregate: Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, Vijnana. And Vedana, Sanya, Samkhara, Vijnana can be categorized into Nama. And Rupa is just more like a form, or you might think about some physical aspect, but this Rupa form already unified states of mind and body. With regard to the five aggregate, I introduce Mahapunama Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya. This sutra is called the Great Full Moon Night Discourse. It starts, "Thus I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in the eastern monastery, the palace of Megara's mother. And on that occasion, Uposatha of the 15th, the night of a very full moon, he was sitting out in the open with the community of monks. Very well, then, monk. Sit back down in your seat and ask whatever you want." Responding to the Blessed One, "Yes, Lord," the monk sat back down in his seat and said to the Blessed One, "Under the five cleaning aggregate, namely form as a cleaning aggregate, feeling as a cleaning aggregate, perception as a cleaning aggregate, fabrication, consciousness as a cleaning aggregate. Monk, these are the five cleaning aggregates. Form as a cleaning aggregate, feeling, perception, fabrication, consciousness as a cleaning aggregate." Saying, "Very good, Lord," the monk delighted and approved of the Blessed One's word, and then asked him a further question. "But in what, Lord, are these five cleaning aggregates rooted?" The Buddha answered, "Monk, these five cleaning aggregates are rooted in desire." "What is the cause, sir? What is the reason why the aggregate of form is found? What is the cause? What is the reason why the aggregate of feeling, perception, choices, consciousness is found?" The four primary elements are the reason why the aggregate of form is found. Contact is the reason why the aggregate of feeling, perception, and choices are found. Name and form, in other words, Nama and Rupa, are the reasons why the aggregate of consciousness is found. But the Buddha, how does identity view come about? If these five aggregates constitute human, then how does identity view come out? It's when an uneducated ordinary person has not seen the noble ones and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They have not seen good persons and are neither skilled nor trained in the teachings of the good persons. They regard form as self, self as having form, form in self, or self in form. They regard feeling as self, self as having feeling, feeling in self, or self in feeling. They regard perception as self, self as having perception, perception in self, or self in perception. They regard choices as self, self as having choices, choices in self, or self in choices. They regard consciousness as self, self as having consciousness, consciousness in self, or self in consciousness. That's how identity view comes about. But sir, how does identity view not come about? It's when an educated noble disciple has seen the noble ones and is skilled and trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've seen good persons and are skilled and trained in the teaching of the good persons. They do not regard the form as self. They do not regard the self as having form, not form in self, or not self in form. They do not regard the feeling as self, do not regard the self as having feeling, not regard the feeling in self, or not regard the self in feeling. They do not regard the perception as self, self as having perception, perception in self, or self in perception. They do not regard choices as self, self as having choices, choices in self, or self in choices. They do not regard consciousness as a self. They do not regard self as having consciousness, do not regard consciousness in self, or do not regard self in consciousness. That's how identity view does not come about. What is the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness? I think I forgot telling you that 5 aggregate. Form is Rupa. Vedana means feeling. Sanya, perception. Samkara, choices or mental fabrication. And Vijnana, consciousness. So, what's the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to form, when it comes to 5 aggregates? The pleasure and happiness that arise from form. This is its gratification. That form is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. This is its drawback. Removing and giving up desire and greed for form. This is its escape. So the Buddha expounded us how we escape from suffering by way of senses. The pleasure and happiness that arise from feeling, perception, choices, consciousness, this is its gratification. That consciousness is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. So all 5 aggregates is impermanent, suffering, and perishable. This is its drawback. Removing and giving up desire and greed for consciousness. This is its escape from suffering. Then, how does one know and see so that there's no ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli? One truly see any kind of form at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, all form with the right understanding. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. One truly sees any kinds of feeling, perception, choices, consciousness at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, all consciousness with right understanding. This is not mine. I'm not this. This is not myself. That's how to know and see so that there's no ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. So if you think that, oh, this feeling is not myself, this perception is not mine, I'm not this perception is not myself, such that it's possible that some foolish person here think they can overstep the teacher's instructions. So it seems good, sir, that Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana are not myself. Mahapanuma Sutta offers the detailed examination of the five aggregates by pointing out that clinging is neither identical with the five aggregates nor something apart from them, but consists in desire in regard to them. When you feel suffering, you are grasped with the idea of this is mine, I am this is myself. That is how to know and see so that there's ego, possessiveness, or underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. In regard to each aggregate, such as Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vijnana, a sense of identity can arise, which can take place by taking the aggregate to be the self, or by postulating the self as the owner of the aggregate, or by assuming the aggregate to exist within the self, or by locating the self within the aggregate. Inquire how to go beyond identification and conceit in regard to the body and external signs so that you can clearly awaken ego, possessiveness, and underlying tendency to conceit for this conscious body and all external stimuli. So I briefly introduced Mahapanuma Sutta from Majjhima Nikaya, but I strongly encourage you to read Mahapanuma Sutra from Majjhima Nikaya. So once you type Mahapanuma Sutra on internet, you can easily pull out this sutra. It's not a very long sutra, so you can read through entire sutra. Five aggregates can be subdivided into Nama and Rupa. Let's look at Nama and Rupa a little bit detail. Rupa indicates form. Rupa is derived from the four great elements. Four great elements form Rupa. What are the four great elements? Four great element is called Mahabhuta. What are the four great elements? Earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. These four kinds of great element compose of Rupa. I mentioned that Rupa as form, or maybe some physical aspect or materials. But Buddhist perspective unify mind and body. Therefore, even these four great elements include some mental aspect, such as earth element is for the solidity and extension, water element for fluidity and cohesion, fire element for the temperature of cold and heat, air element for dissension and mobility. Not simply consider properties of material entities, but consider concretized instantiations of sensorial texture, So these material entities include some sensorial textures. For example, solidity and extension for earth element, etc. Nama, mental factors. So the rest four aggregate, such as Vedana, Sanya, Samkara, Vijnana, they all belong to Nama, mental factors. Vedana means feeling, Sanya, perception, Samkara, mental progress or mental fabrication, and Vijnana, consciousness. So the term Rupa include more complexity in terms of processes and functions which are definitely not only physical. Sense is a system that translates information from external stimuli into neural activity. In the West, there are 5 sense organs. In Buddhist perspective, there are 6 sense organs. They are eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Mind is one of the sense organs in the Buddhist perspective. This is quite different from the West. To eye, object field is visible. Therefore, vision is the sensation. To ear, audible is the object field, and then sound is the sensation. Nose has object field, smells, and sensation is smelling. Tongue has object field, taste, and taste is the sensation. The object field of a body is touchable, and human can have sensation of touch. What about the mind? Mind is one of the sense organs. What is object field of mind? It's the Dhamma. Dhamma means the object of mind or your experience. So it could be your feeling, it could be emotion. So many object fields can belong to Dhamma. Some idea, memory, some mental factors can be the object field of mind. When mind has object field Dhamma, then idea, thought, sensations arise. So keep in mind, Buddhism have one more sense organ called mind. And the object field of mind is Dhamma. Dhamma means object of mind, things, quality, object of experience, or maybe phenomena. 6 types of perceptual consciousness. So when you look at 6 types of perceptual consciousness, 5 types belong to externally and 1 mentally directed perception. So when you look at sense organ, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, those are 5 external directed perception. And mind is mentally directed perception. Object field, you saw that previous slide. And then what kind of a perceptual consciousness you can have? For eye, visible consciousness, ear, auditory consciousness. For nose, olfactory consciousness, tongue, gustatory consciousness, body, tactile consciousness, and mind has mental consciousness. So when I contact visible object field, then visible consciousness arises. Let's look at thought process. So here's 5 externally directed consciousness resulted from 5 sense organ: eye, nose, ear, mouth, and body. And they have their own object field, and then they generate perceptual consciousness. These 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness. But when you look at mind, one mentally directed sense organ, mind, has object field, Dhamma, mind object. As well as this mind sense organ has another object field, that is this 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness can be the object field of mind. So mind has 2 categories for object field. One is just Dhamma. You see in previous slide, Dhamma is the object field of mind, as well as this 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness. All these perceptual consciousness can be the object field of mind. So, mind has Dhamma as object field, as well as these all 5 types of perceptual consciousness generated by 5 sense organ can be the object field of mind also. When Dhamma is the object field of mind, it generates mental consciousness. And these 5 externally directed perceptual consciousness become the object field of mind, then mental perceptual consciousness can be generated. So, mental consciousness, in other words, when mind object is the object field of mind, mental consciousness is produced, and this mental consciousness is called Manodhatu. The characteristic of Manodhatu is the first attention with respect to Dhamma serve as a specific filter to the 6th sense. 6th sense is the mind, collecting out subjective responses to our objective environment. Dhammas denote a pluralistic representation of the world. Mind element activate their respective sense consciousness to function. So, it's a little bit complicated system, but mind is definitely one of the sense organ in Buddhism. And sense organ has sense object. And in terms of mind, the object field can be mind object, Dhamma. And when mind has Dhamma as an object field, then mental consciousness are followed. But mind also has another kinds of object field, such as 5 physically directed consciousness. These 5 physically directed consciousness can be generated by the rest of 5 sense organ contact its own object field, then 5 externally directed consciousness are produced. These 5 physically directed consciousness can be the object field to mind sense organ. Then mental perceptual consciousness are produced. So you can see how Mano Dhatu, mental consciousness, and Mano Vijnana Dhatu, mental perceptual consciousness, fit into its fairly sophisticated system of the thought process. So let's look at the framework of the thought process. 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness become a set of cognitive experience in the thought process arise. This is called Mano Dhatu. This Mano Dhatu is raw material for thought process. You will not have a fully matured thought. You just the beginning part of a thought process. Manodhatu is the first attention with regard to Dhamma and special filter to the sixth sense. The sixth sense is mind. Then thought process further process that eventually the appropriate mano vijnana dhatu, mental perceptual consciousness, arise. This culminating in the comprehension of the input data. Grasping and knowing occur through the operation of mano vijnana dhatu. So 5 externally directed type of perceptual consciousness arise from the contact between sense organ and sense object. And these 5 physically directed consciousness become object field to the sense organ mind. Then mental perceptual consciousness arise. This mental perceptual consciousness allow you to culminate the comprehension of the input data. That is one route for mental perceptual consciousness. But without 5 physically directed consciousness, just your mind object, such as your thought, quality, or object of mind, or object of experience, or some phenomena, those object field contact to the mind and mental consciousness arise. Therefore, you suddenly feel happy, or you think that, oh, I don't know why I feel some sadness. That kinds of emotion, mental consciousness can be followed. Let's think about how many senses in the Western perspective. There are 5 senses in Western world. People think that 5 senses cover up all of human experience. What are those 5 senses? Vision, audition, olfaction, gustation, somatic sensation, touch. First, vision, the reception of light energy. Audition, hearing, the reception of a sound wave, detection of a change in air pressure. Olfaction, smelling, the reception of chemical molecules via nasal mucosa. Gustation, taste, the reception of chemical molecules via taste bud. Taste buds are located on the surface of the tongue. Somatic sensation, touch, the reception of information about pleasure, weight, temperature, movement, pain. Each sense organ has specific structure to receive external stimuli. For example, vision. In case of a vision, what is the main structure for vision? Lens of the eye. Audition. Outer ear, hairs in the inner ear. More specific structure called cochlea. Cochlea looks like snail shell shape inside the inner ear. Which structure allows us to smell? Nose, nasal passage, or nasal hair. Look like a hair structure, and inside the hair there are nerve cells which carry olfactory information to the brain. In case of taste, there are taste bud on the surface of the tongue inside the oral cavity. So inside taste bud, specific cells send a message of taste to the brain. In terms of touch, there are several cells in the dermis. Dermis is located underneath epidermis. And inside the dermis, there are several cells which sensitize pressure, heat, such as cold and hot, pain, etc. just before we investigate the specific structure for specific sense. What about the name of specific cells which sensitize five senses? For vision, they are called photoreceptors, which are located on retina. So in the previous slide, we just studied about the specific structure which is involved to sensitize certain sensation. Now we go into a little bit more detail. Therefore, there is a specific structure, but inside the specific structure, there is a specific cells which are the major player to sensitize and deliver message of a certain sense to the brain. In case of a vision, the name of the specific cells are called photoreceptor, which are located on retina. For hearing, audition, chemoreceptor inside hair cells send auditory information to the brain. Olfaction, for smell, chemoreceptor connect with a neuron to deliver the message of olfaction. Gustation, gustatory cells, which are specialized epithelial cells located inside the taste bud, synapse means connect, with sensory nerve fibers for gustation. For touch, sensory receptors for pressure and pain are called mechanoreceptor for pressure and pain, and sensory receptor for cold and hot is called thermoreceptors. You will hear about stimuli in this lecture. Stimuli means environmental energy or energy change that produce an action. For example, if I say to you, raise your hand, then you will do action by listening from me, because your cochlea inside the inner ear send the message to the brain and stimulate a specific sensory nerve cells which code for audition. How do receptors change stimuli into neural response? In other words, how physical properties of stimulus is translated into a specific pattern of neural activity. There is a process by which environmental energy, such as light for vision and air vibration for hearing, etc. Those environmental energy are translated into neural impulse. We call converting energy from one form to another transduction. So, in case of a vision, photoreceptors in the retina receive a light energy and transduce into the nerve impulse, which is referred to as transduction. Now, we will study sensation, 1 out of 5 sensation, visual sensation or visual recognition. And then the rest sensation will operate similarly. We do not have enough time to cover up all 5 kinds of sensation and perception. But when we study visual perception, visual recognition, you can imagine that the rest sensation and perception also operate similarly. Why I choose visual recognition? Most of our impression and memories of the world are based on sight. So seeing is important, maybe more powerful than other sensation. Analysis of the visual world depends on the information coming from retina. This is the initial stage of processing. How can the external world be translated into our visual experience by way of electrical signals that are initiated in the retina and then travel through the optic nerve toward the brain? In order to understand the function, you must know the general anatomy of the structure of the eye. So you will study the structure of the eye briefly. You don't have to memorize the name of each structure of the eye, but let's look at the overall view. So light enter cornea here, the outermost surface of the eyeball, cornea, and pass through aqueous chamber. Just posterior to cornea is space, and then inside the space there's some liquid filled with this space. We call that aqueous chamber. And light continue to enter pupil, the front portion of lens. The center dark circle area is called the pupil. Outside the pupil called iris, and everybody has a little bit different color of iris. Then light pass through lens, and there's another huge chamber called vitreous chamber. And this vitreous chamber also filled with vitreous humor. Vitreous, some kinds of liquid filled in this chamber, and then eventually light get to retina. Here's the retina. The innermost layer of eyeball is called retina. Now, retina looks like a thin layer, but when you look at retina on the microscope, this retina, thin layer, when you look at retina on the microscope, you will see retina is composed of 7 kinds of different cell layers. One of the most important layers in the retina is called photoreceptor. Here's photoreceptor, this area. Retina contains millions of photoreceptors. Photoreceptors are subdivided into rod cell and cone cell. Rod cells and cone cells, they are not evenly distributed. The rod cells are most dense at the periphery. So you can see here's rod cell, the black color, and then here's periphery rod cell. So rod cells are most dense at the edge of the retina and decrease in number as the center of the retina is approached. So when you look at the center portion, you might see more cone cells. The rod cells allow us to see in gray tones in dim light. Under dark condition, these rod cells allow us to see in gray tones. So even you do not have light, you can see vaguely by help of rod cell. The cone cells allow us to see the world in color under bright light conditions. There are 3 varieties of cone cells, and each type is sensitive to particular wavelengths of visible light, such as blue, green, and red color. If someone shines red light into one of your eyes and green light into the other eye, you will see yellow. This indicates that the mixing and this interpretation of colors occurs in the brain, not in the retina. Still, cone cells just send message of green light and red light. But your brain, human brain, mix green and red so that you see yellow color. So you need to a little bit separate what your sense organs, such as eye, do and what your brain engage in, what kind of sensation or perception. Again, here's cross-section of retina. Light enter photoreceptor. So first, light entering eye triggers photochemical reaction in rod and cones on back of retina. Then, number 2, chemical reaction in turn activate bipolar cells. There are some other kinds of cells make up of retina, such as horizontal cell, amacrine cell, ganglion cell, and bipolar cell. So chemical reaction in turn activate bipolar cell. So light hit the back of retina and then reverse toward the center of eyeball. Now information is sent to visual cortex via thalamus. Some information in relation to light is gonna follow through optic nerve. Optic nerve is the region to connect eyeball to the brain. Now those messages move through optic nerve and eventually arrive at thalamus. So electrical signals pass from the photoreceptor via 2 kinds of neuronal chain. One is a bipolar cell and then ganglion cells. Information is sent to visual cortex via thalamus. Thalamus is some portion of the brain. How image can be built on the retina? When you look at the candle light, actually the image of a candle light on retina is inverted. So image built on the retina is inverted. But when you look at the candlelight, you will see the same orientation of a candlelight object. The optical image that falls on the retina is reversed by the lens, but is faithful representation of the external world. In other words, we see the same orientation of object. We are given tiny distorted upside down image in the eyes, and we perceive the world object, which is nothing short of a miracle. So when this inverted image of object on the retina pass through optic nerve, in the process that this inverted image of object is going to invert it one more time, so that your brain interpret the orientation of object as the same orientation of a real object. Let's look at the visual pathway. So here's light hit the cornea and enter until the retina, and then here's rod and cone cells on retina and send the information through optic nerve, and then now the information arrive at thalamus inside the brain, and that information continue to deliver to visual cortex, the backside of human brain. All information from the sensory organ arrives at thalamus. So inside the brain, the thalamus is the place where all kinds of sensation arrive. But only one sensation does not go into thalamus, rather directly go into frontal cortex. What is that sensation? That is smelling. So olfactory sensation does not pass through thalamus. Inside the nose, there's a nerve cell is already located inside the nasal pathway. And then that nerve cell bring message directly to cortex. So olfactory sensation directly arrives at the frontal cortex, in which you can immediately respond to smell. Since olfactory sensation does not pass through thalamus, people usually very fast sensitize smell. That's why perfume industry can be a promising business. So here's 2 eyes, and here's first neuron, second neuron, and third neuron, and these neurons connect the information received by retina. So the first, second neuron connect to in retina, and then this information pass through optic nerve and then enter the brain, eventually arrive at thalamus and finally visual cortex. So when you look at the information processing from eye to the brain, then this optic nerve is really like a cord, C-O-R-D. And compared to the size of a retina and compared to the width of optic nerve is quite different. So in terms of retina, they carries this amount of information. Then in optic nerve, those informations is kind of squeezed, and some of them might be lost. But those information is reproduced in thalamus or visual cortex. So in retina, two-dimensional image project on the retina, but we perceive three-dimensional image of the world. The visual system transforms transient light pattern on the retina into a coherent and stable interpretation of three-dimensional world. The degree to which this process, such as from two-dimensional to three-dimensional, is creative. So visual perception is not a passive process. You actively create three-dimensional figure. The view that perception is not atomistic but holistic, which means perception involves more than just information provided by the retina. So your brain adds or creates certain figures. So one more time, when you look at the information delivered from the retina, then those information enter the brain, and there's thalamus, and then here's visual cortex, and from the visual cortex, some information in terms of shape or color or spatial location, some attributes are delivered in different direction of the brain. So color, motion, depth, and form of the object is gonna separate it and transmit into different region inside the brain. So in terms of motion information or depth, those information goes up here, dorsal area. But color and form, this information send to ventral pathway. This is dorsal pathway. Dorsal means up and ventral means low. So there are two streams of visual information from primary visual cortex. There are two pathways. One is where pathway, the other one is what pathway. Where pathway helps with moving and not bumping into other things. Go from the occipital lobe to the parietal lobe. Occipital lobe means visual cortex, this back of your brain. So when you touch the back of your head, that is the area for occipital lobe. Or in occipital lobe, visual cortex are located. So the light information sent by retina arrive at visual cortex in occipital lobe. Some attribute of object is gonna follow to where pathway. What kind of attribute follow where pathway? Such as moving or depth. So when you go to the department store, you saw many people, but you maneuver your behavior in order not to bump with the other person. When you see other people, then your eye sensitize other person and send this information And this information pass through retina and then eventually arrive at visual cortex in occipital lobe, and then the movement of other person, that information is gonna send to parietal lobe. And this information makes you think that, okay, I'm gonna take this route in order not to bump with that person. Another pathway is called what pathway? It recognizes the object. So, what is that object? What does that object mean to me? Okay, so what pathway just recognize the object by looking at the color, by looking at the shape and structure of the object. So what pathway goes from occipital lobe, in other words the visual cortex, to the inferior temporal lobe? So when we look at object, we think that we see one object at the same time in one pathway, but that's not true. Our brain disintegrated some parameter, some attribute of the object sent to where pathway, some other attribute sent to what pathway. But these several attributes eventually merge and integrate in your frontal cortex, and then you think that you are seeing those same object at the same time. Actually, inside the brain, there is some kinds of a visual operation take place in a complex manner. So when you look at visual cortex or occipital lobe, some attribute of that object follow where pathway. Some attribute of that object such as shape, structure, and color, those information goes to what pathway. Eye is located here, and here's back of head. Again, here's occipital lobe, and then the where pathway goes up, parietal lobe. The top of your head is called parietal lobe, and the bottom of your brain is called temporal lobe. So once visual information arrives at visual cortex, and spatial processing such as space or depth or movement, those information go up to parietal lobe. But object recognition such as shape, structure, and color of the object send to temporal region. When information go up to parietal lobe, we call that where pathway. When information of the object send to temporal region, we call that what pathway. Okay, today you've studied thought process in Buddhist perspective, and also you examine neuroscientific approach for thought process by way of visual recognition. Next time, we will compare and align each step of thought process from both systems, that is, Buddhism and neuroscience. Let's solve quiz question first. When the five aggregates are subcategorized, what is the mental faculty called? Five khandhas are subcategorized into two, Nama and Rupa. So you can find the answer of quiz 1. Quiz 2. Which of the following is not one of five aggregates? I already introduced each component of five aggregates, so you can easily find the answer of quiz 2. You need to submit quiz answer to my email address for your attendance. So this is the example of submitting week 2 assignment. This is my email address. Include your email address. Subject title is BMN 520. You need to include course code. Otherwise, I might miss your submission of an assignment. So please include course code number BMN 520 and the date, January 10 assignment, and use main text body. Do not make attachment file. You just need to write down your official name, last name, comma followed by first name. Then you write down the quiz answer. That's it. So the content you need to send to me is not huge. Therefore, do not generate attachment file. You just write down your option name and quiz answer, and the due of this assignment is January 23rd, Sunday midnight, because next Monday is official holiday. This is the end of lecture video.